member in the Psychological and Counseling Services Program, which is the most recent iteration of the counselor education program that Harold Cottingham started many years ago. I need to send regrets from Marcy Driscoll, who was intending to be with us this morning, but unfortunately couldn't be here, not feeling well. But she sends her warm welcome for everyone for the colloquium and wishes us best. It's been a remarkable week for the college. This is the kind of the last event in our College of Education week, where we're really bringing people to campus and many events and really focusing on the mission of the college and the many things that we're up to. And I think we've saved the best for last here with the Cottingham colloquium. I want to say just a few things real quickly about what we're trying to achieve with this colloquium. This program has been a successful program for many, many years since it was really formed in the 1950s, really as the whole counseling field blossomed. And the excellence of the program has really evolved over the years. But I think the areas that Harold was really interested in, counseling and counselor education, remain the core of the program. And so one of the goals of the colloquium is to maintain that sense of excellence and innovation that he really started with many years ago. But the other thing, it's really for students, is another goal of this, is to really provide an opportunity for students to interact with some of our alumni who have been successful in many and varied ways in the working world. So that's part of our goal. You'll see students kind of come and go throughout the day. In fact, here come students now. Your timing on this is perfect. So students will be coming and going because they have class. So that will be part of this process. But we really wanted to give students a chance to really interact with successful alumni and to get a sense of what their future might be. The third goal was really building community with alumni in the local area, as well as former faculty, building a sense of community that really will help us to maintain the strength of this program. I want to mention a little bit about Dr. Cottingham. I met him one time right before I came to FSU, shortly before he passed away. He really created the program. He founded it at a time when FSU was really on the rise. He was part of an original group of faculty members that were brought to Florida State University that are referred to as the 49ers, who really helped to put this university on the map. A great innovator, and he really infused in the program a sense of a growing profession and trying to create a strong presence in the state of Florida and the nation for counselor education. He was quite a leader in the profession, as well as creating the program here, always striving towards professionalism and excellence. And it's in that spirit that we're really creating this colloquium today. He was quite a man and quite an inspirational gentleman. Let's just go over the agenda real quickly. You've got it, I think, with you. We are going to shortly have an introduction from Peter Scanlon, another one of our distinguished alumni, who will introduce Jan Greenwood, who will be our speaker today. Jan will have about 45 minutes, an hour or so, to share some thoughts with you. And then we're going to have a panel discussion, and we have three panelists. That would be Jan, Peter, and Joe Garman, you will meet shortly. And we have a stimulus question. How has your work as an entrepreneur contributed to your clients, your community, and to your professional career? So from a student's perspective, we really wanted to get a sense of what what is entrepreneurship in the public sector, in the not-for-profit sector, in the private sector. And our goal in this is to really help students gain a broader vision of what they can achieve in their future. In other words, what are all the possibilities that are really open to you? And who has better credibility than alumni who've really been successful in the world in achieving these goals? And we've had great luck with panel discussions in the past. They've worked well, and so each panelist will have about 15 minutes to respond to that question that I just read you, and then there'll be a half-hour discussion time. So the success of this colloquium is directly related to the quality of the discussion that we have regarding this particular point. A couple of housekeeping details. Obviously, food and drink in the back. Restrooms are out through the double doors, back down the hall, and on the left. So the last thing I wanted to mention is some thank yous. One is for the people who really put this on. Courtney Stombach and Amber Smalley and Ken Higgins worked diligently to really make this a success. And Adam, who greeted you when you came in, also worked very hard on this. But I'd also like to recognize Rebecca Cottingham and Sarah Cottingham down here in the front row, Harold's daughters, who are just amazing to listen to them and the stories they tell about him and his life. Is always a delight. But they have supported this colloquium from the very beginning. Two other thank yous. One is to Bob Reardon, whose tireless support of this colloquium has really made it possible, his energy and his enthusiasm. He's been probably the most important figure in terms of maintaining the program and its continuity and connections with alumni and its presence. And last, I really thank Peter Scanlon, whose generosity really has made this whole event possible, who was one of Harold's students. And with that, I will turn it over to Peter for an introduction of Jan, and I look forward to this.
Thanks, Jim. Well, I need to first start by thanking some of the people you thought, especially Harold's daughters. I want to thank you for Rebecca and Sarah for sharing him with us. Last year we did this and had a really good opportunity to hear more about his life and about his personal life. And what came across so strongly was a sense of such integrity. This was a man that you knew exactly what you were going to get. He was who he was, no matter where he was. And that integrity certainly came across to us as students, and his establishing the department, which is essentially what he did, really gave a foundation which we've all benefited from. And also to thank Bob Reardon for his leadership in pulling this all together. He came up with the idea, and I want to tell you how much I appreciate it. I'm very glad to meet today Jan Greenwood. She and I have not met. I, of course, am much older than she, so we couldn't get to share time together at Florida State. But read about what she's accomplished, and I'm so impressed by it, and I'm looking forward to your comments. Jan is the president and CEO and founder and partner of Greenwood Asher Associates, which is a firm that does executive placements, does training, and also does consultation. They have an office here in Florida, and they also have another center in just outside the Washington area, serving that area. And she gets around the country and really around the world. She's done over 1,000 searches, executive searches, about 100 years of consulting, and they're not just her personally. All associates have 100 years of experience So her background and experience is something we all look forward to hearing about. Prior to that endeavor, she was the vice president and partner in a global executive search firm, and they did 97% of their executive searches. The companies came back and had to use them again, and that kind of consistency is an earmark of consumer satisfaction. She's held a number of important positions in higher education and the world of business. She has held 2 presidential positions in private and public sector school systems. She has been a tenured full faculty member. She's been a counselor in the K through 12 range, and the most admirable and brave of all, she was a high school teacher. I know what that was like. I did it for a while, and I was the worst teacher in the world. Everyone was glad when I left because I did something else. Jan has an AA degree from Pace College, master's degree from Eastern Carolina University, and received her PhD from Florida State, where she studied counseling, but also was smart enough to take some courses that actually helped her build a business in leadership and business. So she held executive positions, Educational and Faculty Affairs Committee, Board of Executive Directors, and committee member of the American Council on Education. She was the chair of the Council on Preschools in Virginia Public High School, chair of the American Council on Education Executive Search Roundtable, and we're all very fortunate to have her with us. She's going to remain seating because of an unfortunate leg injury, so there it is. Thank you very much.
You I can't hold a job. So I'm going to set the framework today, and I will be seated most of the time by this chart over here. And I'm trying to figure out who in the room is the youngest person. What age is the youngest?
22.
22. Okay. Thank God there's no one 19. Okay. A lot of what you're going to hear from me today has to do with strategically planning in terms of your life and your career so that more opportunities become available to you. And I've used this chart in a number of national workshops I've done that basically is almost 5-year increments that help people see how they can strategize about their career. So for example, we work with a lot of people who want to be university presidents. Now, 65 years old is no longer 65. 65, though, is a frame that some states still require people to retire if they're 65. So in terms of that, we always, when we're talking with a university administrator who wants to be a president, that if they're going to be a president by 59, be a provost by 55, be a dean by 49, be a full professor by 45. So it helps them kind of frame out. It's not as rigid as it sounds. It helps them frame out a way to think about their career. Another way to look at that would be if you're going to start your own practice or you're going to start your own firm, try to have that in the works so that you're developing along about this age, this 49, 45-year-old, so you can move it forward. For me, I never plan to retire. I will probably literally drop dead in an airport because that's where I live. So, there's no upper limit right now except, anything if I become impaired intellectually. That would be a limitation, but there's none right now. Another way to conceptualize things as we're talking today is there are 2 different pyramid approaches to thinking about your career and your life. As faculty, as researchers, as practitioners, we tend to become more and more specialized. We become known for something that we're really, really good at. The federal government funds people for their research when they become renowned in a specialty and they have new ideas contributing to the intellectual knowledge base of the world. So they tend to look like this as they start out, but perhaps a little bit broader. They become more narrow, more focused. Now again, this is not hard and fast. With administrators, it's pretty much the opposite, in that they start off maybe as broad as this, but they expand it even more as they go through their career. They have to gain the knowledge to be able to work more at a broader level. So two different ways to think conceptually about your life and your planning relative to your career. And the reason that the 5-year horizon is in that chart on the left is that in general, for most people, it takes about 5 years to be able to generate a list of things you've accomplished on your watch and been able to see the results of those. So that's why that 5-year window is there. Some of the basic things that I would share with you are sounding, as I wrote them, they're sounding very trite, but they're so extremely meaningful. First of all is the planning approach. In our experience, and we've closed over 1,000 searches in 20 years, that means 1,000 people have been happy and approximately 10,000 have been unhappy. It's an interesting field to be in where you want to leave people with hope for the future and what they can do, and that's part of our work as we go through this. But the notion of planning, of building blocks, of how to get there, if you have the substance, I was talking with some of the students last night, if you have the substance, you can easily develop the skill sets for interviewing. If you've ever had dramatic arts, for example, as a topic, you probably would do better in an interview. If you've ever had debate or public speaking, you probably would do better in an interview. But whether you have or have not, those are skill sets that are learned. They can be easily learned. And we see people over their whole career span, and we see them when they're just in their first interview, and we see them when they're in their 40th interview, and there usually is a tremendous difference because of the learning curve and learning how to interview. One of the other things, are just some little pointers I want to mention about thinking about your life and your career. A second thing, which has meant more to me as just a statement than many things in life, is, again, the trite expression that life is what happens when you're not paying attention. And that is really, really true, because we see people who get, quote, stuck, and they just feel they cannot get unstuck. So when you're paying attention and you're planful, you will find more opportunities will open for you. So we find people who will sit back and say, well, I'll wait till the next best thing comes along. And for those people, quite frankly, a lot of them, there won't be a next best thing. You almost have to reach a point where you have to create the next best thing. And that's what entrepreneurial and self-leadership is all about, to create those next best things for you as options. That's why with this upside-down pyramid, expanding your horizons has to do with creating opportunities for more breadth. And the more breadth you have, then the more options you have. For example, in higher education, to use that as an illustration, there are different types of universities. There are community colleges, there are liberal arts, there are comprehensive institutions, and there are the great research institutions like Florida State. We know in looking at it through the years, if a person takes a sideways step or a step to a less complex institution, it's very hard to move up to a more complex institution. So let's say as a student, you had a real passion for working in the community colleges. I did an internship at Tallahassee Community College when I was here. But when I was here, I thought the horizons were, I was going into teaching counselor education. Some of the people were going to be college student personnel administrators. Some were going to be higher ed administrators. So I did not even see on my horizon the opportunity to be a full-time practitioner. It just was not in the works. The first mentor I had in life is sitting in the room, Cheryl Reagan's. And Cheryl Reagan's, as a woman, as a strong, bright, effective woman, very politically savvy, very much knew the workings of the university, very much unleashing entrepreneurial spirit and letting me do things. She was a critical part of helping formulate what I've been able to do in life. So so as you think about people and what they contribute to your life and what you contribute to their lives, then just think about it in terms of that, because there's always a part in life that has to do with giving back, and giving back is a really important principle as well. And I was thrilled to hear that all of the students I talked with last night have already gone down the road of giving back. They've been involved in volunteerism, and you learn things from that. Another saying that has meant a lot to me, which I got from my mother, is that education is the only thing in life you cannot lose. You can lose your health, you can lose your wealth, you can lose your family, you cannot lose your education. Once you've got it, you've got it. And so value every minute. Again, life is what happens when we're not paying attention. Value every minute of that. And then another thing she really brought to my attention was you only get what you work hard for. It struck me last night in talking with the students that while they had had substantial volunteer activities, none of them that I spoke with at that time appeared to have had to do what I had to do, which was always work while I was a student. And that was from age 13 forward. So I never had the luxury of just being a student and focusing on just being a student. So I think you learn things from the more opportunity you have to interact with the real world. And those are, again, opportunities you can create and then take advantage of what the opportunities are that are there. Another point we talked about last night with some of the students is a balanced life. And one of you mentioned to me the article, "You Can't Have It All." Well, you can have it all, but it depends on how you define all. So one of the things about having it all has to do with that definition. But for me, for example, it's been work, it's been family, it's been giving back, it's been activities with friends. But as I have found throughout my life, emphasis may vary based on phases of my life. So I think that students, for you may find that experience too. If you end up having children and your child is in Cub Scouts and they want to go skiing, and you go with them, if you have the adventuresome spirit to take a whole troop skiing one day, then in those situations, that is a more balanced life, whereas when your child is 40, that's the last thing they want to see you do. So it varies, based on life phases, and I would add that as another point to remember. You can have it all. It depends on how you define it in your life phases. The other thing is learn from your experiences. Learn from your failures. Learn from your successes. Always ask yourself, what have I learned from this? What has been the learning, the teachable moment? And another thing, too, which I learned, I think I learned this more after I left Florida State, was that you cannot personalize feedback. If you're getting criticism for something you deserve that you've done, take it as such. But there's a lot of criticism that people get or have to encounter or learn to deal with because of the role they're in life, not because of their personhood. And it's really important that you learn that difference and you recognize it and be honest with yourself, what you're getting because of the person you are versus the role you're in. And especially those in administrative positions and faculty sometimes with their students, they will get flack because of the role they're in, not necessarily something that they've done. And part of growth and development is being able to step back and almost visualize yourself, be honest with yourself, and know what it is you need to do to have continuous improvement as a goal. So I would mention that. There is an overlay to everything you do, whether you're a student, you're a faculty member, a practitioner, an administrator, an entrepreneur. I believe you're an entrepreneur in every role you play in life. As a student, you can be an entrepreneur. Cheryl allowed me to be an entrepreneur by rehabilitating Divinity Hall, rehabilitating the culture, rehabilitating the physical environments. It's going to be torn down soon, so it's about time. But at that point, Divinity had become a hall where students went who didn't want to be bothered. So it was very much a hall where there were just individuals with locked doors. We worked with that, had great fun with that, with Cheryl's approval, and developed a culture where, for example, every Sunday evening we were having cookouts where My husband and I were bringing back fish we caught that weekend from Destin, and the students would all bring potluck dinners, and we began to form a sense of community. And then we did the student development activities on the various residence hall floors that allowed that to happen. And then the students came up with a conceptualization that I thought Cheryl would probably drive me out of town over, but they went after top-of-the-line furniture to make the environment match their newfound image of themselves in the residence hall. And Cheryl said, sure, why not? And they did it, and they took care of it. I don't know how many years they took care of it, but they took care of it while I was there, and they did it at their own initiative. So learning that spirit of entrepreneurism as a student, as an employee, as an employer, becomes really important to foster in people. As a faculty member, learning that in the days when budget cuts came and you had to find new ways to create money, what did? We started a major symposium at the University of Cincinnati and brought in people like Albert Ellis and filled auditoriums with 500 plus people to hear him. And so, again, ways to make money. You've done that here. Certainly, Jim and those of you in the Career Center have created an environment, and Bob, those that have created an environment that's responsive to very little resources and needing to serve masses. So they've come up with an extraordinary approach to providing career development services for people who are needing career development services that were unheard of back when I was an assistant director of career planning and placement at Rutgers. So that kind of making lemonade out of lemons, if you will, to use another tried expression, becomes really important. But thinking of each of your roles, regardless of what your role is, as having three major components. One is the ability to demonstrate leadership and vision. Whether you're a student, a faculty member, a practitioner, a business person, you always have the ability to demonstrate leadership skills and also vision, and bring that to the table. The second is management. Now, for many of you students, that has to do with time management, especially as it relates to getting your coursework done and doing an excellent job at that. But as you go through life, there's the time management under the umbrella of doing it all, having it all, and how you learn the contingency plan for your contingency plan. And quite frankly, there's no role I've held in life that allowed me to learn that more clearly than being a mother. And then looking after a senior mother. You plan 3 or 4 levels deep of contingencies because it's necessary, and it's a very important skill. Also, that has to do with management of financial resources and all of that. A third area is resource development. That's a huge umbrella. When we're talking with university presidents, it has to do with raising money from donors. It has to do with getting money from legislators. It has to do with getting federal grants and contracts. It has to do with getting foundation funding. It has to do with enrollment of students, retention of students. But the big thing that gets lost in terms of resource development is the discussion about human resource development. And there are 2 dimensions of that all of you will face in life. One is your personal human resource development, and the other is helping others in terms of human resource development, because without that, nothing else flows. So that's really important. In terms of those 3 areas, there's a way that I have helped people in higher ed conceptualize how to demonstrate for your resume, for your interviews, accomplishments. There's a behavioral assessment model that our firm uses that we have entitled PAR, P-A-R. And we've done that. It has nothing to do with golf. But we've done that, and quite frankly, we call it that because people can remember that because of golf. So P is for process, A is for accomplishment, R is for role. So when we're working with people and talking with them in search committees, we're asking them, what have you accomplished, what was your role, and what process did you use in leadership and vision? What about in resource development? What about in management? So those are ways to demonstrate that. And then we help people, we don't have time today to go into it, but we help people learn how to know when what they've said is adequately complete. I'll give you one illustration of that. The illustration would be some people, I'll give you a real life illustration. A guy said, he he was asked, what have you done in the area of budget? And he said, I manage the budget, I have no deficit. So there's that statement, that really doesn't tell you anything. And then another one said, I managed the budget, I had no deficit, I had to reallocate $2 million, which was put into seed money for new ventures, which brought about an additional $10 million to the university. Aha, that's an accomplishment. He led that, and the process he used, he went on to define in working with others. So as you think about what you're doing, just kind of keep track in your own internal curriculum vitae where you record everything you've done in life, not necessarily the one you would use to be a professor, but keep track in terms of the concepts of leadership and vision, management, and resource development. And the umbrella over all of that is entrepreneurism. So if you always have that spirit of entrepreneurism, you will find the other things will flow quite naturally. Now, some of you last night, well, let me touch on one other point, core values. You will learn things, you're building upon the blocks that you grew up with in terms of core values. You will learn things in life that punctuate those points or maybe detour from those points or maybe add to those points. So for example, at Florida State, I learned several very important lessons on ethics. And it's carried me throughout my entire career in life. And I think that while you don't always look for those opportunities, when they happen, they present an aha moment to you. So for example, one of those things was having written an article that was in press, and that article, unbeknownst to the person who used it, was handed to them, and they gave it as a speech at a national convention. Unbeknownst to them, in the audience were the people who had approved it and knew it was in press. So there's that kind of thing that you have to be careful in your work, that you don't pass things on as yours for someone else to misuse unknowingly and end up being quite embarrassed over it. Another thing, too, that happened in the counselor ed program when I was here, because I took courses, my major was counselor ed, but I took college student personnel. Mel Hardy being here was the legacy of the world of college student personnel at that time, and she was a major draw to this university for students, and of course higher ed administration as well. So I had the three as a major emphasis when I was here. But when I was sitting for my doctoral exams, we were in a room, and there were probably, I forget, maybe 10 students in the room, and the guy sitting next to me was cheating. And it was so disturbing to me that I left the room. I went and saw my major professor, Nick Gimstead, wonderful, wonderful person, and said, I'm very troubled by this, but this is what's going on. And felt totally relieved that I told him that I could release it and go back and finish my exam. I have no idea what happened to the student who was cheating, but it was clear that that was a turning point. Do you ignore that? Do you turn a blind eye to it in other ways, or do you report it? And one of the things we've learned that Seth could talk with you ad nauseum about from the University of Virginia recent lessons is that because of the honor code at UVA, that has led the ability of the faculty, the alumni, and the students to respond appropriately to the behaviors that went on there at the board level. So the honor code, the ethics, the sense of who you are, your core values are really important. That later in life for me led to, in my first presidency, putting together an honors and ethics weekend where we brought faculty, students, staff, and board members together to focus on honor worldwide. And we started with case studies. We went from macro to micro. So the macro was Chernobyl. Some of you are too young to remember what Chernobyl was. It was basically a nuclear disaster. And so that was one case study, and we worked through the weekend down to the micro, which is I'm a student in the residence hall. I have a roommate. She's just had her boyfriend move in with her. What do I do? So there's the two female students and the male boyfriend. So that kind of thing then led to that university starting an honor code and an ethics code and an emphasis. But that originated with the incidents at FSU that I then took with me throughout life. And it also has come into play in many ways when a board member one time asked me to rig a bid so that he would get a $15 million contract. And rather than respond, I simply took out a pen and paper and I wrote out my resignation and handed it to him. I didn't say a word to him. And he said, he tore it up, he said, we'll forget this conversation ever existed. So building the stamina to deal with the realities of life, it's very important, and this university contributed that to my background. It built upon the core values I already had. Now, watching our time, I know that some of you want to know about how I got from where you are students as a student to where I am now. And so what you just heard, they were all building blocks that allowed me to go down this journey, go through this journey I've been going through. So I think that there's several key points, and I'm going to touch on them lightly because of time, and then any you want to drill down on later, we can talk in more detail about it. I think one of the things I was blessed with was a mother whose sister was a surgeon. So from age as early as I can remember, hearing that Jan was going to become a surgeon was really important. That being said, I lost my first patient who was a kitten. So that's when I detoured from surgeon. But that's another story I won't bore you with right now. Then there are lessons in life you learn what you don't want to do. I bet some of you have had that. So at age 13, I was sent out to work on a tobacco farm in North Carolina and to do what's called barning tobacco. You would hang the tobacco in the barn. I learned from that I was never going to do a job I got filthy at, and I was never going to touch tobacco. So those were two things at 13. That's a pretty big deal to pick that up early on. I think also I learned from my mother that you really do only get what you work hard for. So she had the principle that I had to make enough money to pay for college, to pay for a car if I wanted one, that she would buy me contact lens and a pair of shoes a year, but everything else I had to pay for. So that started yours truly working in women's specialty stores and working my way up from a clerk, a file person they hid in the back room because I was working illegally, I was too young, to bringing me out to then working as a salesperson, then window designing, and then at that stage some modeling, and then gradually buying, and then management of the store. That carried me through my master's degree. That's how I paid for college. That's how I paid for my first Mustang in 1965. So, you know, that's a lesson. It was a hard lesson. It was a hard lesson, especially when you're going to college with, my first college was all women, and they were rich women. And I was there working, but I got the catbird seat because I was working as also a student hostess, so I got to greet all their dates as they were coming to the lunch. There is a definite advantage to that position as a freshman. Then I think one of the things from the junior and senior years in college, like you, volunteer work was very important. I was a Kappa Delta. I guess I'm supposed to say I still am a Kappa Delta. And I had already done volunteer work. I had grown up again with the core value that you always give back. So every year there was always a trip of donations to the Salvation Army and other things, a volunteer at the hospital, other things. But sorority required a substantive activity in the summer. So I actually founded the Tuberculosis Association office in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And I did that as a college student. So that was, again, setting that up. That was a big topic back then, students. Setting that up so that it was operational and ready to go. So that was a learning experience. In teaching high school English, and teaching, Peter, teaching was easy. Being a K-12 counselor was, I got shot at. You know, you learn these lessons, but what I learned as a school counselor, we had two children who were first grade and third grade who were coming to school with impetigo, and the younger one was also, he had school phobia. So the social worker and I decided we'd go out to the home to visit the mother, right? Seems reasonable, Got to the front door and the mother's boyfriend was standing on the front porch and fired a shotgun at us. Fortunately, it went over our heads. Well, we learned later why the kids had impetigo and school phobia. That's another long story. But I decided it might be better to go into another profession at that point. High school teacher, what my students taught me, I was teaching high school senior English, and I was teaching Shakespeare, and I had a slow class right after lunch. I had an advanced class first thing in the morning, and so I was trying to consider how I could bring alive Shakespeare for the slower class. So I was doing some things with the faster class, and the ones after lunch had found out about it, and they said, well, why aren't you doing that with us? Hello. So I immediately remedied that, and they got more from that class probably than the smarter class got. But that was a lesson learned in that way too. I've talked with you about Cheryl's major role in terms of my background, but there was another incident here that was very instrumental. When I was at the dissertation level, how many of you are at the dissertation level now? Any of you? Well, when I got there, I had a committee. It was headed by a very famous person in vocational development, David Tiedemann from Harvard, who was here. And I was doing a front-end study on the psychological impact of televised cartoons on children. There was not research on that at that point, and David had orchestrated a career for me with Children's Television Network. So that's where I was headed. Then I leave on vacation and come back, and my entire committee had left the university. And Dr. Joyce Check was the new head of the program. And she said, well, your committee's left, so you have Mick Gemstead as your new major professor. He knows nothing about, nor do any of our faculty know anything about what you were doing. So you have to pick a new topic and start over. So Mick, being a brand new professor, only knew paraprofessional training from a research perspective of chairing a dissertation. So that was a detour that put me into higher ed. So the study then was, a new study was started, a year-long study, looking at paraprofessional training of residence assistants at Florida State, Florida, and South Florida. But that then led to changing, it really made the case that was used by ACPA and ACUO to change the training for resident hall assistants. So it was a case that acknowledged, yes, they do counseling, and so you might as well train them because that's how it has to be. So there was that detour. So then just in summary, kind of moving very fast through a number of years, when I was finishing my doctorate, I thought, I was going to be a counselor educator. That's what you do. And I interviewed down at FIU. FIU was opening the next year. So Chuck Perry, a 28-year-old president, was putting together his team. And I went down and interviewed with Chuck, a dynamic guy. And he offered me a position there as part of the founding administration of FIU. And I'm sitting there as a very brand new, arrogant PhD saying, if this little guy, he's little when he's alive, if this guy at age 28 can be a university president, I sure can too. So then I started down the road of finding out, well, what do you have to do to become a university president? And what do they do anyway? Because it looked like he was having a lot of fun. So then I found out you got to be a full professor with tenure, you got to be a dean, a department chair, you got to be a provost, you got to do all these things. I've written about it, I call it the route of least resistance. There's other ways to get there, but that's the route of least resistance. And so I decided one of the first things I had to check off was I needed a teaching experience at a major public research university. So off I went to Rutgers. Because of the great education I got from the faculty here, and because there were only 2 teaching positions open that year nationally in counselor education, I got hired by Rutgers to teach in the counseling psych department, and also to be assistant director of career planning and placement in the counseling center. So that was a nice hybrid. And then again, unleashing entrepreneurism, we needed paraprofessionals. Guess what the dissertation was just done on? So build a group with 1,000 paraprofessionals working all of the Rutgers campuses. And that was something that carried on. So that was a model where doctoral students supervised masters, undergraduates, and we developed the model that way, and that worked out well. And so then in going to the University of Cincinnati, Ohio State came after me, Cincinnati came after me, and Cincinnati was the university of choice because they were the most entrepreneurial. They basically said, if you'll come to us, we'll build your own research lab. You can be head of the program. You'll be associate professor with tenure. You will have an administrative sabbatical and an academic sabbatical guaranteed. And by the way, Warren Bennis is president. Warren Bennis is a very significant name internationally in the leadership area. So went there, and then Warren, as a mentor, unleashed opportunities in the Organizational Behavior Teaching Society for me. Along that way, they had also guaranteed me some postdoctoral work in Tavistock group process. So they sent me to England for that training in addition, which was wonderful. That's played a big role. So then at that point, I'm wrapping up very quickly now, students. At that point, the question was, do I become a president? Because I was a VP for Student Affairs at that point and a full professor, promoted from within, or do I become a provost and then a president or whatever? But women were not getting jobs as presidents, except at very troubled institutions, with the exception of Hannah Gray at the University of Chicago. So the first troubled institution that came along that I had an interest in was Longwood College. It is now Longwood University. We had 2 years to turn it around. Actually, they gave me 3 years. We did it in 2. To turn it around, merge it with Virginia State, or close it. And it is a university where 4 alpha chapters originated from in the sororities. It is a university that has taught probably every student coming through a school in Virginia has been taught by a Longwood grad. So again, that was another major culture shift at that institution because they were better than they believed they were. And then we had to build on top of that. And then the second presidency was another major turnaround where it was either close it or turn it around quickly, but with heavy-duty union trouble in addition. So that was another type of opportunity. And then you might say, well, why search? Well, this is where it comes full circle, students. One of my doctoral students at Rutgers graduated and started her own search firm. And she's been a friend of mine forever since then. And she said, well, you should go into search. You know group process, you know leadership development, you know career development, you know higher ed. You can do all this. It brings everything together. So I said, well, why not? And about that time, Heidrick & Struggles, which was a leading global firm in the corporate world, came after me to be a consultant with them as a VP and a partner and a director. So I went with them. That led then to starting my own firm, and I decided to start that with Betty Asher, who had been a doctoral student of mine at Cincinnati, full circle, students. So look carefully at your faculty, you never know when they may come back around to you. But working with her off and on since the 70s, and in what was it? I guess it was 93. No, it was 2003. We decided we'd start our own firm. A week after telling my firm I was leaving to start my own firm, I was diagnosed with cancer. So then, as you can imagine, all the healthcare questions, what if, and all this stuff. And Betty Asher, and I decided we were going to go forward anyway. So we went forward. All clients stayed with me. We continued the journey. Every year we've grown the business. Every year we've increased the profile of repeat clients. We worked as far away as Japan and Hong Kong and Australia. We've done worldwide work. And we now are the largest higher ed search firm dedicated to higher ed in the industry globally. And we have people working all over the country, but a major presence in the Metro DC area, and of course located in Destin, Florida. So that brings us full circle. So let me stop with that. And Jim, I'm watching our time, but I figured since that it was okay. So should I do a few questions?
Yep, I think we've got about 7 minutes.
Okay, so any questions or comments, or any of you want to throw rotten eggs at me or whatever? Yes.
I have a question for you. I've loved listening to your story. I think it's a phenomenal and very exciting journey. You talked a lot about obviously the very career milestones that went along with this. I'm curious, on the social side of things with your family, if it's not too personal, what was like one of the hardest things you had to deal with, and how did you deal with it? I'm trying to balance your family with your amazing career.
Yeah, I think that's a very close to home question, because as a professor at Rutgers and at Cincinnati, I ran groups for women students who were being besieged by husbands. Why are you doing this? How can you leave us? Why aren't you paying attention to what you're supposed to be doing? And they were feeling enormous guilt for wanting to pursue a career and pursue their doctorates. So I was able to help them. But I think the toughest personal point was at the point we had adopted our son, I was married, my mother was retiring, moving in with us. So all of that coming together, which was during the Cincinnati years. But every time you add another dimension, you add that much more complexity. And so it's one thing if you carve out time for a husband and yourself and work. It's another if you carve out time, you add a child, and now you carve out time, you add elderly parent. So learning to manage the complexities and be sure there's good quality with every one of those dimensions is really tough. But that's where you get into the contingency planning for contingency planning, 3 or 4 levels deep. So that was the toughest. You just have to keep your priorities in order. You have to be sure what's on first. Janet, that's good timing. Yes.
Something I've kind of heard in your presentation, that the importance of mentors at turning points. That I heard several times there was a mentor there for you. I just wonder if, when you look at significant changes in your career path, you find yourself a mentor to facilitate that change.
I think, in all honesty, the mentors, with the exception of Chuck Perry, were more laying the foundation for me to do what I wanted to do. Chuck was a mentor in that way, but also relative to trying to get me to run for governor, trying to get me to be president of FIU, a number of things which were not in my dream, they were in his dream. So being able to keep straight my priorities versus a mentor's priorities. I mean, for example, Cheryl never was shoving me to Rutgers. She was not doing that, but Chuck was trying to, in his own way, expand my horizons, not only in terms of career, but also, by that time I was divorced, also in terms of who I should be dating. That got ridiculously funny at one point. So, mentors are critical to the foundation. Now, in today's world, mentors are critical to getting positions, because certainly in higher ed search has become such that unless you're nominated by someone, many search committees won't even look at you. Once you become a dean, you're at the dean's level and up. So it's really important, because candidates come from ad responses, meaning I think I'm qualified, so I'll apply, nominations, third-party endorsement, and our market outreach, and we'll talk with about 500 to 700 people per search. So the nomination, which is coming from mentors for the most part, is really critically important. And I think today, some call it mentoring, some call it sponsoring, but it's a very important role. It has developed into that kind of role, in addition to laying the foundation and helping create your whole career. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, just reflecting as a faculty member, playing the mentor role, and I heard from your perspective of the receiver of mentorships and how you profited from them.
Yeah, and I think from the other end, I was a mentor to Barbara, who started her own search firm. I was a mentor to Betty and a faculty member with both of these women, who now is a partner with me in our firm. So it comes full circle. Comes full circle. Cheryl? This is the infamous Cheryl.
Do many people in your business, do many of them come from counseling backgrounds as you have?
No, some of them do not even have advanced degrees. Some of them have never worked in higher ed. We also work in K through 12 and nonprofits. We've done CEO for Boys and Girls Clubs of America, for example, Chancellor of the New York City Public Schools. So most of them are very, they're very tactical in looking at it as a this. We're more at the strategic level and forming long-term relationships with people. We've done at some universities, we've done as many as 30 searches. So, for example, when we go into FIU, they rely on me to continue the legacy of how FIU got started and to tell people. So it's just really interesting watching how, again, it comes full circle. A lot of them, too, Cheryl, approach it as transactional, and I don't have a transactional bone in my body. So it's just more at the strategic level. Thanks, Janet. Janet and I had a signal. First call meant tea with half a thing of honey in it. Thank you, Janet. So I saw another hand there. Yes?
In terms of your confidence, would you say that your early experience working is what that created for you?
That's a really interesting question. I think one piece comes from learning from mistakes and being willing to be open to learning from mistakes. But I have to say that I think that you're also on target with just being put out there and, learning from hanging tobacco in a stupid barn to explaining, trying to understand why a woman who wanted to buy a black slip wouldn't buy a white slip because she thought you had to wash the white ones more often. I mean, just learning about people, learning about things, learning life lessons from people you interact with. Even today, some of the universities we go into, watching the local TV station, it's a real step back in time. And I have to constantly remind myself that I'm dealing with people at Harvard, I'm dealing with people at a community college, at a small high school, and very rural, very urban. This is an America with many different faces. And it's not always what we say in Northern Virginia, which is 2 miles from D.C., so it's literally, Old Town Alexandria up there. We're within the Beltway. There's a within the Beltway mentality. That's not the rest of America. So you have to constantly have that reminder. And quite frankly, I think it makes you humble. It keeps you humble. Anyone else? Jim?
I have one. You discussed with the first question about balance and family issues. From your perspective, have the issues that women face today, are they the same as they were? Have they evolved? Where are we with women's issues in leadership and higher education? Because most of our students are women. How have things changed?
Well, there's slow progress in higher ed. And when you take apart data on faculty, there's some academic specialties that have actually not moved forward, they've slipped backwards. There's some administrative areas where that's happened the same. We have, over the past 5 years, we track data on placements. And I can tell you that over 20 years, the people our clients have hired have come from people we recruited, not from ad responses. I can tell you over the past 5 years, there's been a dramatic change where over 50% of the people that our clients have hired are women and or people of color. So there is more of an openness now. That being said, there's far less awareness on the part of the students today of the bridges they're standing on to get where they are, so that they don't even realize it as a historical issue it is. So I think I would put it in that way. So I'd say to you, women and men in the audience, it is wide open for you. There are not limitations. The only limitations you're going to have in life, and I really believe this, are those you place on yourself. So if you don't place them on yourself, I describe it to candidates in this way. You're going down a career path and the road divides. You're going to go one way or the other. There's a boulder in the middle of the road. Your job is to figure out how to plow around that boulder, or how to move that boulder out of the way, and then decide which path you want to go down. So when I became a president, the options were be a visiting faculty member at Harvard at the B School in organizational behavior, organizational development, or be a president. So I went down that path. So that there are paths you're going to have. Do I stay in K through 12 or do I go into higher ed? Well, after getting shot at, I went into higher ed. So, you know, there are paths, and sometimes your decision making is rational and sometimes it's not. Getting shot at is no reason to leave K through 12. It felt like it at the time, you know, when I was, 27 years old, 26 years old. But it's not a real reason to leave K through 12. It's a reason to not go to homes, perhaps, as a mother. Leave that to the social workers. So, Jim.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate all of your good comments. What I'd like to do now is invite our panelists to come up, which would be Peter Scanlon and Joe Garman. And here's how I'd like to structure this particular part of our time this morning. And that is that we have people who have been successful entrepreneurs. And what I'd like to do is have them speak from their perspective through their own personal experience. And we selected 3 very different people. You've already, I think, gotten a good sense of Jan's perspective and where she's come from. But Peter Scanlon is Executive Director of South Bay Mental Health in the Boston area. And he essentially, in an era of providing public services through private enterprise, has really been very successful in reaching out and providing fundamental services in his community. But he's had to make it happen. He's had to create those opportunities. So it's a private company that really serves the public. Joe Garman is a little closer to the aspirations of a good number of our students. He has a very successful private practice in Thomasville, Georgia. But the way he's developed the private practice is he's leveraged beyond what he can do as an individual. To be really successful in private practice, you need more hands at work than just your own. And so he's figured out a way in a community to involve more people than just himself in doing that. So the question I've asked each of them to really look at is how as, and there is a typo in the program I've since noticed, it would be how has your work as an entrepreneur contributed to your clients, to your community, and your professional career. So how is being entrepreneurial a benefit to clients, to the community that you live in, and your own professional career? I'd like to change. I've already told them how we would do this and the order they would go in, but I'm going to switch it up a bit because I think it would it makes some sense to do that. Give Jan a little chance for a breather here as she's been talking. But to ask Peter to start, and then Joe, and then Jan can reflect on her own comments that she made initially, as well as what she's heard